Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast. The Origins of Architecture, Chapter 5, Houses and Hearths. In the previous chapter, we explored how the emergence of walls transformed architecture from temporary shelter into a system of enclosure, permanence, and spatial organization. We examined how early construction methods gradually stabilized collective life through material continuity and environmental adaptation. In this chapter, we move from enclosure to habitation itself. The discussion is no longer focused only on how humans built walls, but on how they began living within them socially, culturally, and emotionally. The house is often treated as one of architecture's most familiar forms. Yet familiarity can also obscure complexity. Houses are frequently understood as functional structures designed to provide shelter, privacy, and domestic comfort. However, the earliest houses represented something far deeper than mere enclosure. They marked the emergence of organized everyday life within stable spatial environments. The house, therefore, became not merely a building type, but a framework through which human relationships, routines, and identities were gradually structured. At the center of this transformation stood the hearth. Long before houses became architecturally sophisticated, fire already functioned as one of humanity's most important spatial organizers. It provided warmth, protection, cooking, light, and social gathering. Yet the hearth also held symbolic importance, as it created a stable center around which collective life could form. In many early settlements, the hearth served not only as a technical necessity but also as the emotional and social core of domestic space. This centrality transformed the internal organization of architecture itself. Once fire became spatially stabilized within settlements, interior life acquired continuity and repetition. Activities increasingly gathered around fixed points within enclosed environments. Cooking, eating, resting, tool-making, storytelling, and social interaction gradually became associated with recurring spatial patterns. Architecture, therefore, began organizing not only protection from the environment, but also the rhythms of everyday existence. The emergence of domestic space also transformed the relationship between architecture and time. Temporary shelters often prioritized immediate survival and rapid construction. Houses, however, introduced continuity into daily life. The repetition of routines gradually embedded memory into interiors themselves. Hearths, sleeping areas, storage zones, and circulation paths became associated with habit and familiarity. Domestic architecture, therefore, contributed directly to the formation of spatial identity. At the same time, houses should not be understood through modern assumptions of privacy or individuality. Early domestic environments were often collective, multifunctional, and socially dense. Activities now separated within modern architecture frequently occurred within shared spaces. Sleeping, food preparation, storage, labor, and social interaction often overlapped spatially. The early house, therefore, functioned less as an individual retreat and more as a communal environment structured through cooperation and proximity. This proximity shaped social behavior profoundly. Once humans began spending extended periods within enclosed domestic environments, architecture increasingly mediated interpersonal relationships. Spatial organization affected visibility, interaction, hierarchy, labor distribution, and family structure. Domestic architecture, therefore, became one of the earliest frameworks through which social life itself was spatially regulated. The house also transformed the meaning of interiority. Earlier shelters primarily protected the body from environmental exposure, but houses gradually created environments conducive to emotional attachment and social continuity. Interior space became connected to familiarity, memory, belonging, and identity. The distinction between inside and outside, therefore, acquired psychological depth alongside physical definition. This transformation contributed directly to the emergence of domestic culture. Objects accumulated within houses because permanence allowed storage and continuity across generations. Tools, food reserves, construction materials, ritual objects, and personal belongings increasingly occupied stable locations within architectural space. The house gradually evolved into a container not only of bodies, but also of collective memory and material culture. The organization of domestic labor also became increasingly architectural. Agricultural life required repetitive daily activities, including food preparation, maintenance, storage management, tool production, and environmental control. These routines shaped the internal logic of houses over time. Architecture emerged here not through abstract design principles, but through accumulated patterns of habitation and repeated bodily interaction with space. This relationship between body and house also reveals the experiential nature of early domestic architecture. Houses were not experienced visually alone, but through warmth, smoke, smell, sound, proximity, movement, and routine. The hearth crackled, materials aged, smoke darkened surfaces, and bodies continuously interacted within confined interiors. Domestic architecture, therefore, operated as a lived environment long before architecture became dominated by visual representation. The emergence of houses also changed the relationship between architecture and gendered labor. While social structures differed significantly across early settlements, domestic environments increasingly came to be associated with differentiated forms of activity and responsibility. Food preparation, storage management, maintenance, childcare, craft production, and other daily tasks shaped the spatial organization of domestic interiors. Architecture, therefore, reflected broader social structures through the organization of everyday life. At the same time, houses remained deeply connected to environmental realities. Early domestic environments were still highly responsive to climate, geography, and material availability. Openings controlled airflow and light, walls moderated temperature, and local materials shaped construction techniques. Domestic architecture, therefore, continued functioning as a negotiation between human habitation and environmental conditions. This environmental responsiveness reveals why houses should also be understood within the broader logic of vernacular architecture. Early domestic forms did not emerge through universal models imposed across different regions. Instead, houses adapted continuously to local climates, materials, cultural practices, and social structures. Architecture remained inseparable from place because habitation itself depended on environmental adaptation. The house also contributed to the emergence of intergenerational continuity. Permanent domestic environments allowed families and communities to remain connected to specific locations over time. Architectural space, therefore, began carrying memory across generations. Houses preserved traces of occupation through repaired walls, reused materials, repeated routines, and accumulated modifications. Domestic architecture gradually became part of collective historical continuity itself. This continuity transformed the symbolic meaning of home. The house was no longer merely protection against external conditions, but increasingly represented stability, belonging, and attachment to place. Architecture acquired emotional significance because human identity itself became increasingly rooted within permanent domestic environments. The emergence of the house, therefore, marks one of the earliest moments when architecture became psychologically internalized. Yet despite this growing permanence, early domestic architecture remained dynamic and adaptive. Houses changed continuously in response to environmental pressure, family growth, labor patterns, and material conditions. Architecture evolved gradually through use rather than through fixed completion. Domestic space, therefore, remained a living process rather than a static object. The relationship between house and hearth ultimately reveals that architecture was becoming inseparable from everyday life itself. Construction no longer organized only survival or collective settlement, but also intimacy, memory, routine, and emotional attachment. The house transformed architecture into a continuous framework for habitation. In this sense, domesticity became one of civilization's earliest architectural conditions. In the next chapter, we will move from domestic interiors to shared collective environments. We will examine how early settlements gradually developed gathering spaces, communal structures, ritual centers, and organized public interaction. The discussion will shift from intimate habitation to collective presence, from household continuity to social organization, and from domestic routine to the emergence of public space. Because once humans learned to live together in houses, the next transformation became inevitable, learning to gather beyond them. This concludes Chapter 5 of The Origins of Architecture, Houses and Hearths. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.